May 5th, 1873. The prairie wind carried the faint smell of rain and dust across southeastern Kansas when Colonel Alexander York rode into Cherry Vale. 3 long weeks had passed since his brother, Dr. William York, vanished without a trace. What began as a missing persons inquiry would soon unravel into one of the most horrifying murder stories ever written into America's restless frontier history. Beneath the worn floorboards of an abandoned inn, investigators would find 11 bodies, each buried with methodical precision behind a modest 2-story building where travelers once sought refuge. The air that day was thick with silence, broken only by the rustle of grass bending under the wind. The inn had once welcomed the weary, settlers, merchants, and families passing through on the Osage Mission Trail. Now it stood hollow, a monument to deception, its walls heavy with secrets and the lingering scent of blood. The discovery left even hardened lawmen speechless. Blood-stained hammers, a hidden trapdoor slick with human remains, and whispers of a woman named Kate Bender, the so-called spiritualist who claimed to commune with the dead. For 2 decades, the Bender family had run a roadside establishment that doubled as a slaughterhouse of the unsuspecting. The legend would later name them America's first family of serial killers. But at the time, they were simply one of many immigrant families who had settled on Kansas soil. Ordinary faces in a landscape built on survival, silence, and trust. The Kansas Territory in the 1870s was not a forgiving place. It was a land where hope clung to the horizon and danger hid behind every bend in the trail. In the southeast, the Osage Mission Trail carved through endless miles of prairie grass, an artery of movement and ambition connecting Fort Scott to independence, and beyond that, the gold fields of Colorado and California. The land was both promise and peril, where life depended on the kindness of strangers, and the distance between settlements could stretch into desolate eternity. Small communities dotted the plains every 20 or 30 miles, each a fragile island of life surrounded by the sea of wind and grass. A general store, a blacksmith, perhaps a saloon, and a handful of houses clustered around a dirt road. That was civilization on the edge of the world. There was no constant law, no rapid word of danger. The nearest sheriff could be 50 miles away, a doctor even farther. Communication relied on passing mail carriers or wandering traders who might not appear for weeks. This isolation was both freedom and curse. It allowed settlers to live by their own rules, away from judgment or interference. But it also left them vulnerable, because when someone vanished, there was rarely anyone to notice, and almost never anyone to help. It was within this world that the Bender family arrived. Sometime in the late 1860s, no one knew exactly where they came from. They spoke with thick German accents and offered little about their past. John Bender, the patriarch, was a man in his 60s, stooped and severe, with hands built for labor and eyes that revealed nothing. His wife, Elvira, was older still and cold as winter stone. She seldom spoke, and when she did, it was in muttered German or short, guttural replies that left conversation to die mid-air. Locals called her Mother Bender, though few said it kindly. Their home sat along the Osage Trail, 160 acres of prairie grass and scrub oak, about 8 miles from the growing town of Cherry Vale. From the road, travelers could spot it from miles away, a modest 2-story house with whitewashed walls and a red roof gleaming against the endless blue of the Kansas sky. It looked harmless, welcoming even. 2 younger figures completed the family, John Jr., a simple-minded man in his 20s with the heavy gait of someone used to hard labor, and Kate, 24 years old, tall, strikingly beautiful, and dangerously persuasive. She was the voice, the face, the lure. Unlike her parents, Kate spoke fluent English. Her accent was faint, her manner confident, and her education surprisingly refined for a frontier woman. Nearly 6 feet tall, with dark hair arranged in intricate braids and piercing blue eyes that could freeze or charm with equal force, she commanded every room she entered. People in Cherry Vale whispered about her beauty. Others whispered about her gifts. Kate claimed she could speak to the dead. In those post-Civil War years, spiritualism swept across the country like wildfire. Families broken by loss sought comfort in seances and psychic healers who promised that death was only another doorway. Kate seized that belief and made it her business. She offered readings, herbal remedies, and spirit consultations to anyone willing to pay, or anyone she wanted close enough to learn more about. Travelers on the Osage Trail spoke of her with fascination. Some detoured miles off their path just to sit at her table, hoping to hear from lost loved ones. She performed her seances by lamplight, her voice low and rhythmic, her eyes distant as if listening to voices beyond mortal reach. People swore her words brought them comfort, that she knew things no stranger could. The Bender home, like its owners, seemed ordinary at first glance. Its stone walls were sturdy, its wooden beams built from local timber. The first floor was divided by a hanging canvas sheet. The front half served as a general store where travelers bought tobacco, canned goods, and ammunition. The rear was a dining space and sleeping area for paying guests. Beneath the floorboards, unknown to all but the family, lay the hidden cellar that would one day reveal their secret. To weary travelers, the Benders were a welcome sight. The prices were fair, the meals warm, and the conversation, at least when Kate was present, pleasant. She would read palms, tell fortunes, and perform small rituals that left guests spellbound. Laughter and candlelight often drifted through the prairie night from that house, a soft glow promising safety and rest. No one suspected the trap laid beneath the charm. For a while, the Benders' reputation was positive. Locals considered them hard-working immigrants contributing to the growing community. Kate attended church socials, joined in discussions about new schools, and helped raise funds for civic improvements. Her name appeared in conversations about marriage prospects, though her father's cold demeanor and her mother's hostility discouraged most suitors. Still, she maintained a veneer of grace, presenting herself as a woman of intellect and spiritual insight. But beneath that surface, a pattern was forming, one so subtle that it went unnoticed for years. Travelers who passed through Cherry Vale sometimes never reached their destinations. A cattle buyer here, a merchant there, a family heading west, all lost to the wilds of Kansas. People assumed the frontier had claimed them. It was easy to believe that. There were wolves, bandits, storms, and miles of nothing between towns. No one connected the disappearances to a single place, a single family, or that quiet stretch of prairie road. Everything changed in the spring of 1873. On March 9th, Dr. William York, a respected physician from Fort Scott, stopped at the Bender Inn on his way to Independence. He was 40 years old, well-dressed, educated, and confident, a man who carried himself with purpose and authority. His horse was fine, his saddlebags filled with medical instruments and supplies, and he was known to travel with cash to purchase what he needed along the route. As evening fell, the prairie turned to gold, then violet, then black. The Bender house glowed faintly against the dying light. Dr. York arrived as the sun dipped below the horizon. Inside, he found warmth, food, and Kate. She greeted him with a practiced smile, asked about his work, his travels, his life. Her interest seemed genuine. Her voice carried the kind of sympathy that disarmed even the cautious. Over dinner, she spoke of her healing arts and her connection to the unseen world, offering to perform a reading that might reveal his fortune or warn of danger. Those who later recalled that night remembered seeing the doctor and Kate in deep conversation by lamplight. She asked about his schedule, his routes, and who might expect him if he were delayed. Her curiosity appeared harmless, friendly even, but it was information she would use. The next day, Dr. York never arrived in Independence. By evening, concern spread among his patients and colleagues. Within days, search parties were organized, questioning every inn and outpost along the trail. When asked, the Benders claimed that the doctor had stayed the night, but left early the next morning. He was in good health, they said, determined to make up for lost time. Kate even offered to help find him, through the spirits. She gathered a small group of townsfolk and performed a séance, her voice trembling as she described visions of the doctor attacked by bandits far to the west. Her performance moved several to tears. The story fit perfectly with the dangers of the trail, and suspicion drifted elsewhere. But Colonel Alexander York wasn't swayed by tales of spirits. A Civil War veteran hardened by loss and deception, he relied on facts, not visions. He began retracing his brother's path, questioning witnesses, marking timelines, and comparing every rumor. The investigation soon revealed something chilling. Dr. York was not the first to vanish along that road. He was one of many. Over the past 5 years, men and women had disappeared between townships, each carrying money or goods. A German immigrant named George Lohner vanished in 1871 while traveling with his life savings sewn into his clothes. A cattle driver, Ben Brown, went missing the following year, last seen at a stop along the same trail. Even an entire family, the Mackenzies, husband, wife, and child, had vanished without a trace. No one had connected the cases before, because each had been investigated separately by local authorities who rarely shared information across county lines. Now, all trails led to one place, the Bender property. As the Colonel's team dug deeper, they found the Bender's story wasn't as simple as it appeared. Records from other counties hinted that a woman matching Kate's description, same height, same blue eyes, had operated as a spiritualist under different names in several Kansas and Missouri towns. Each time she set up shop near busy travel routes, offering seances and remedies. Each time a handful of travelers went missing, and each time she vanished just before questions began. In Parsons, Kansas, she'd been Kate Gart, the miracle medium who promised to heal the grieving. In Chettapa, she was Kate Miller, the fortune teller who guided merchants to their supposed destinies, some of whom never returned. Everywhere she went, money and lives disappeared, leaving behind whispers of charm, power, and something else, something darker. The pieces fit together like bones unearthed from the earth. By April 1873, the walls around the Benders' deception began to crack. Colonel York prepared to confront them directly, armed with evidence and backed by lawmen. But before the search could begin, the family sensed the tightening noose, and then came the dawn of May 4th. A neighbor riding past the Bender property noticed something strange. No smoke rose from the chimney, no sound of animals, no light in the windows. The inn that was always awake before sunrise stood still, silent as the grave. When he drew closer, he found the door open and the rooms empty. Beds unmade, food left unfinished, possessions scattered as if the family had fled in the night. By the next morning, May 5th, 1873, the search began. And what they unearthed beneath that house would stain Kansas soil forever. The morning broke gray and hollow as a storm gathered beyond the horizon. A cold wind swept across the open prairie, rattling the wooden siding of the abandoned Bender house. When Colonel Alexander York and his men arrived, they found the place eerily silent, as though time itself had stopped the night before. The front door hung open, creaking faintly in the wind. Inside, dust motes floated in the pale light that filtered through grimy windows. Every corner whispered of a family that had vanished in haste, leaving behind the ghost of their deceit. The inn smelled faintly of spoiled food and something else, something metallic and sour that clung to the air. On the wooden floor near the dining table, investigators noticed dark stains that had seeped between the planks. At first glance, it might have been old wine or spilled coffee. But under closer scrutiny, the truth emerged. It was blood. The stains stretched in uneven streaks toward the back of the room, stopping just before the canvas partition that divided the store from the family's living quarters. Beneath that partition lay the dining area where guests had once sat, laughing and eating, while Kate Bender spoke softly about the world beyond the veil. That same spot would prove to be the entrance to a world far darker than any she had pretended to reach. Colonel York ordered the boards pried up. The wood split with a sharp crack, revealing a hidden trapdoor sealed so precisely it had escaped every eye that passed over it. When the men lifted it, a foul stench of rot and iron filled the room. Below, in the dim cellar, the earth was wet and black, stained by years of soaked blood. The cellar was small and low-ceilinged, its air heavy and suffocating. The floor wasn't stone, as one might expect for storage, but packed dirt, sloping gently downward to a corner where dark fluid had long collected. The walls bore marks, smears and splashes, dried in patterns no imagination could mistake. Against one wall rested a series of tools, hammers, knives, a mallet still sticky with old gore. Every surface whispered the story of violence repeated over and over again. The discovery silenced the men. These were frontier investigators, accustomed to murder, to robbery, to death in every shape. Yet none of them could speak as they took in the room beneath their feet. It wasn't the chaos of a sudden killing. It was methodical, practiced. Someone had designed this space not for storage, but for slaughter. The trapdoor's location told its own story. It sat directly beneath where guests would have been seated at the table, their backs to the partition. When the trap opened, a single movement could send a body tumbling into the pit below. Some believed the victims were struck first, bludgeoned without warning, then dropped through the door. Others thought the seat itself was rigged to give way. Whatever the method, the result was the same. The cellar below had been a private execution chamber, a factory of death hidden beneath the ordinary chatter of an inn. As the investigators worked, one of them found something strange near the far wall, a set of pulleys and ropes rigged through metal hooks in the ceiling beams. It was a crude but functional hoisting system. Through it, heavy bodies could be lifted or lowered through the trapdoor without struggle. The grooves on the walls showed where the ropes had rubbed for years. The careful design proved this was not the work of improvisation. It was business. When the first body was found later that day, any lingering doubt about the family's guilt vanished. Just beyond the orchard, under a young apple tree, the earth turned soft and gave way easily to the spades. Beneath 3 feet of soil lay the remains of Dr. William York. The back of his skull had been crushed, the fatal blow delivered by something heavy and blunt, likely the mallet retrieved from the cellar. His money, instruments, and personal effects were gone. His horse had disappeared, but his clothes were intact, suggesting robbery was only one piece of the crime. The orchard behind the house, once admired by passing travelers for its symmetry and fruit, soon revealed its true purpose. The trees had been planted with eerie precision, each aligned over disturbed soil that concealed the dead. The orchard was a graveyard disguised as a garden. Word spread quickly through Cherry Vale and beyond. People came from miles away, drawn by horror and disbelief. By afternoon, the property was filled with volunteers digging through the soft ground. Every shovelful of dirt unearthed new horrors: bones, clothing, fragments of human life swallowed by the prairie. By sunset, 11 graves had been found. The pattern of death was unmistakable. Each adult victim had been killed the same way, a single crushing blow to the head, delivered from behind. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of struggle. Whoever had done this knew exactly when and how to strike. Among the bodies was that of a young girl, barely 10 years old. Her name was later identified as Mary Ann Mackenzie, the daughter of a family who had disappeared years earlier. Unlike the others, her skull was unbroken. Her small hands were found curled above her head, fingers packed with dirt. The evidence was undeniable. She had been buried alive. The revelation broke even the hardest men. The prairie wind that night carried no sound but the dull thud of shovels and the quiet sobs of those who looked upon her grave. The murders were no longer about greed or desperation. They were about something colder, more deliberate, a cruelty that went beyond human necessity. Inside the house, as the search continued, investigators found a hidden compartment behind a false wall in Kate's bedroom. Inside lay stacks of handwritten notes, pages of names, and chilling details about people who had visited the inn. Some of the names matched missing persons reports from across Kansas and Missouri. Notes described appearances, financial means, travel routes, and even psychological details: fear, loneliness, trust. Each one seemed to be an assessment, a profile of who would die next. There was more. Tucked among the papers lay a small leather-bound diary. The handwriting was neat and controlled, the words cold and analytical. It wasn't the diary of a frightened woman or a reluctant accomplice. It was the record of a mind that viewed murder as method. She wrote of tests and transitions, of helping souls cross the threshold between life and death. There were passages about the sensation of watching someone die, about the silence that followed their final breath. She described it as the purest stillness, a moment where the living and the dead briefly touched. She spoke of spiritual acceleration, her term for the belief that some souls could be released more easily through violence than through natural death. Each killing was described as an experiment, a test to see which kinds of people were ready to move on. The victims were men, women, and children alike. She made no distinction, only observations. Her words revealed something more terrifying than simple madness. They showed calculation, purpose, a belief that she was not committing murder, but fulfilling a divine or supernatural duty. Kate wrote that the spirits thanked her after death, whispering to her in dreams that they were finally at peace. Whether delusion or lie, it was her justification for horror. Investigators found sketches in the margins, crude diagrams of the cellar, notes about angles of attack, and lists of preferred tools. Some pages detailed how to dispose of bodies efficiently, how to disguise graves by planting crops or trees above them. The meticulousness suggested years of refinement. The Benders had not stumbled into murder. They had perfected it. As night fell on May 5th, lanterns flickered across the Bender property. Each light marked a grave. The wind moved through the orchard, rustling the leaves as if the earth itself breathed in mourning. For the first time, the people of Kansas saw the prairie not as open promise, but as a vast, indifferent wilderness capable of swallowing evil whole. When the remains of the 11 victims were gathered, the count did not feel complete. The diary hinted at more, at places in Missouri and southern Kansas, at journeys west where other souls had been guided. The realization spread among the investigators. The murders at Cherryvale were only a chapter in a much longer story. The Benders themselves were gone. The beds unmade, their clothes left behind, their livestock still tethered. They had vanished like ghosts, taking with them every answer the living sought. The search for them became one of the largest manhunts the frontier had ever seen. Posses formed across counties and states, riding out in every direction. Posters appeared in post offices and town halls, offering bounties for their capture, dead or alive. The image of Kate Bender spread like wildfire through the West. Newspapers described her beauty in the same breath they described her evil. Her height, her piercing eyes, her gentle voice, it was the contradiction that haunted people most. She didn't look like a killer. She looked like someone who might take your hand and tell you everything was going to be all right before she took your life. Rumors surfaced daily. Sightings in Missouri, Oklahoma, even Texas. A fortune teller in Denver who matched her description. A healer in San Francisco. Each claim set off new hunts, each one ending in disappointment or doubt. Some believed the family had been killed by vigilantes, their bodies hidden to deny them notoriety. Others thought they'd escaped south into Mexico, where German immigrants could easily disappear among the hills and villages. But for many, the truth didn't matter. The damage had already been done. The prairie had swallowed too many souls. And the idea of the Benders became larger than the people themselves. A legend of deceit, greed, and madness that cast a shadow across every lonely road in the frontier. As for the land where their house once stood, it never healed. Farmers who later tilled the soil swore the ground was cursed. Crops refused to grow where the graves had been. Some nights, they said, the wind carried whispers, soft as sighs, rising from beneath the apple trees. Whether it was imagination or something darker, no one lingered there after sunset. The Benders' story was far from over. Their crimes had been unearthed, but the reach of their deception and the question of where they went was only beginning to unfold. And somewhere out there, beyond the edge of the known world, the spirits Kate claimed to serve waited, restless and unavenged. The Bender house stood hollow against the prairie wind, a skeleton of wood and silence. After the discovery of the bodies, the land itself seemed unwilling to breathe. By the morning of May 6, 1873, the property had become a macabre spectacle. Hundreds of people arrived from neighboring towns, some to help, others drawn by the morbid curiosity of what they called Hell's Half-Acre. Wagons lined the trail, and men who had fought in the Civil War stood pale and shaken before the open graves. The orchard behind the inn no longer looked like a garden. Holes marked where apple trees once stood, their roots tangled in human remains. Each grave told a story of trust betrayed and horror carefully planned. 11 lives unearthed, but the ground promised more. The tools, the trapdoor, the sloping cellar, all spoke of repetition, not accident. What they uncovered wasn't just murder. It was a routine perfected over years of deceit. Inside the house, the air was heavy with the scent of damp wood and decay. Investigators sifted through every room, searching for clues to where the family might have gone. What they found deepened the unease. Beneath a false panel in Kate Bender's bedroom, they discovered papers, letters, and a diary. Pages written in a neat hand that betrayed no remorse. The words on those pages revealed the mind of a woman who believed herself chosen, not damned. Kate had written of the work with an almost clerical detachment. She described the acts of killing not as crimes, but as transitions, moments when she helped souls cross over to the other side. Each entry read like a sermon, mingling spiritualist language with surgical precision. She wrote of energies, of purity, of cleansing through death. Her words were devoid of emotion, yet they dripped with delusion. One passage read that the spirits grew restless within the flesh, and that some souls cried to be released before their time. She saw herself as the instrument of that release, chosen to perform a sacred duty. Another entry described the night she first heard their whispers, voices urging her to act, to deliver others to the peace that lies beyond suffering. Investigators would later agree that Kate wasn't merely complicit. She was the architect. Her intelligence, her command of English, her social grace, all had made her the perfect predator. While her father and brother performed the killings, she planned them, selected the victims, and disguised the family's blood-soaked trade beneath a veil of charm and mysticism. But what made her most dangerous wasn't her cunning. It was her conviction. Among the diary's pages were lists, names, occupations, notes about financial means. Each line represented a life that had likely ended beneath the Bender's roof. She kept track of who traveled alone, who carried valuables, who was unlikely to be missed, and next to many names, a single word: freed. The colonel read those entries with a clenched jaw, his fingers digging into the paper until his knuckles whitened. He had come looking for his brother. What he found instead was a ledger of death. Outside, the wind carried the scent of turned earth and blood. People whispered about the Benders' escape. Some believed they had fled north toward Kansas City, where trains could carry them beyond the frontier. Others said they had gone south into Indian Territory, where no sheriff's badge carried weight. A few believed they hadn't escaped at all, that the prairie had swallowed them whole, as it had so many others. Colonel York didn't believe in ghosts. He believed in pursuit. He organized search parties that spread across 3 states, offering rewards for any trace of the family. Posters bearing their likenesses appeared from St. Louis to Denver. Wanted for murder, the words read in bold type, followed by sketches of the 4 faces: the stern old man, the silent matriarch, the dull-eyed son, and the woman whose beauty masked the face of death. Days turned into weeks. Leads surfaced, then evaporated. A group of vigilantes near the Colorado border claimed to have caught them, but no proof ever surfaced. Some said the vigilantes executed the Benders on the spot, hanging them from cottonwoods before burying their bodies in shallow graves. Others whispered that the killers had bribed their captors and vanished under new names. No one ever saw them again. The mystery of their disappearance only deepened the legend. In a land built on superstition and silence, stories spread like prairie fire. People swore they had seen Kate in Denver, dressed in fine clothes and offering seances to the wealthy. Others insisted she had been spotted in California, her hair dyed dark, her voice still soft and mesmerizing as she told fortunes in San Francisco parlors. But none of the stories could be proved. The diary, however, left behind truths darker than rumor. Investigators found descriptions of earlier years, accounts of places and people far beyond Kansas. Parsons, Chautauqua, Missouri. In each, she wrote of temporary dwellings, clients, and transitions. She described how she would draw in those who suffered loss, how grief made them vulnerable, how easily faith in the unseen could become a weapon. Before the Benders settled near Cherryvale, they had lived in at least 3 other towns under false names. Each time, disappearances followed. Each time, they left before anyone connected the dots. They were not mere opportunists. They were nomadic predators, feeding on the faith and loneliness of the frontier. In one passage, Kate wrote about her methods. She observed people closely, reading not their fortunes but their weaknesses. Those who fear death, she wrote, are most ready to meet it. The ones who claim courage tremble the longest. She experimented with how she spoke, how she dressed, even the lighting in her seances. Everything was calculated. The notes revealed she studied the tricks of other spiritualists: cold reading, sleight of hand, mental suggestion. But she went further. She used her supposed powers not just to entertain or comfort, but to learn secrets: how much money her clients carried, where they were headed, who would miss them if they never arrived. Each session became a test, a way to determine whether someone would live or die. She wrote of the cellar, describing it clinically: the slope of the dirt floor, the angle of the trapdoor, the tools arranged by weight and handle. She wrote of the sound each weapon made upon impact, of how some deaths were clean while others lingered too long. The detail was nauseating. Her fascination bordered on scientific. One entry recounted how different victims responded in their final moments. She noted their prayers, their fear, their silence. "The loud ones leave quicker," she wrote. "The quiet ones take time." What chilled the investigators most was her entry about the Mackenzie family, the husband and wife killed first and the child buried alive. Kate called her the smallest vessel and described how she struggled between worlds longer than the others. The language was detached, almost admiring, as though she believed she had witnessed something profound rather than monstrous. The discovery transformed the investigation. This wasn't a family driven by hunger or greed. It was something else, ritualistic, methodical, driven by belief as much as profit. Colonel York's men scoured the property for additional evidence, digging beyond the orchard into the surrounding fields. They found fragments of clothing, bones too old to identify, and signs that bodies had once been moved and reburied. It became clear that what they had unearthed was only part of the truth. The Benders had been killing long before Cherry Vale. By midsummer, the manhunt had grown into a national obsession. Newspapers called them the Bloody Benders. Some articles painted Kate as a temptress whose beauty masked her evil. Others portrayed her as a witch who had enslaved her family through her dark arts. The public devoured every rumor, every imagined sighting. She became both villain and phantom, her name whispered like a curse across the plains. Yet the deeper truth lay not in myth, but in psychology. Kate Bender embodied a kind of darkness the frontier had never seen before. A killer not born of rage or necessity, but of purpose. Her manipulation of faith, her calculated charm, her use of spiritualism as a weapon, it was something chillingly modern, far beyond the primitive violence of the frontier. The York investigation revealed something else, something that changed how the law viewed crime in the untamed territories. The frontier's vastness and poor communication had allowed the Benders to operate unchecked for years. County sheriffs had jurisdiction over areas larger than some eastern states, and few ever compared notes. Missing persons went unreported or were written off as victims of the wilderness. The Benders had thrived in that silence. Now their crimes forced a reckoning. The Kansas legislature pushed for better coordination between counties. Sheriffs began sharing reports, tracking disappearances, and communicating through telegraph when possible. The horror at Cherry Vale became the blueprint for organized law enforcement in the region. Still, justice remained hollow. No arrests, no trial, no confessions. The killers had vanished like dust into the wind. As summer gave way to autumn, the Bender house was stripped bare. Souvenir hunters tore away the floorboards, chipped pieces of stone from the cellar walls, and carried them off as grim trophies. Some swore they heard whispers when they stood in the ruined cellar at night. Others said the ground pulsed faintly, as if the earth itself still breathed the memory of the dead. Years later, farmers tried to reclaim the land. They planted wheat, corn, and fruit trees. Nothing grew. The soil turned gray and lifeless, the crops withering before harvest. Locals began to call it the cursed ground. Some avoided even passing by after dusk, claiming to see shadows moving near the tree line. The Benders' story became legend, retold around campfires and taverns, a tale of beauty, deceit, and death that seemed too dark to be true. But the graves were real, the cellar was real, the diary was real, and somewhere, perhaps far from Kansas, the woman who called herself Kate Bender might have been alive. Her eyes still cold and calculating, her voice still soft and persuasive, weaving new stories for new believers. For the people of Cherry Vale, the horror left a scar that never faded. The trust that once bound travelers to strangers was gone. The prairie no longer felt open and free. It felt watchful, haunted. And long after the Benders disappeared, their legend remained a warning that even in the vast freedom of the frontier, Evil could build a home, smile at your table, and disappear before dawn. In the months after May 1873, the Bender property became a wound upon the Kansas prairie, a place where curiosity mixed with horror and faith trembled before what it had found. People came from miles around to see the house that had hidden a slaughterhouse beneath its floors. They came on horseback, in wagons, and on foot, clutching their children close while staring at the orchard that had fed on human flesh. By midsummer, the wind itself seemed to whisper their name, the Bloody Benders. Reporters from St. Louis and Chicago descended on Cherry Vale, eager to capture the nightmare in ink. Their articles painted Kate as both monster and mystery. A woman whose beauty had drawn men to their deaths and whose voice had sent them willingly into the pit below her floorboards. They described her as a witch, a temptress, a demon draped in the illusion of holiness. For the public, she became something more than human, a symbol of the darkness that could hide within the promise of the American frontier. But beneath the sensational headlines, real men still searched for answers. Colonel Alexander York, the man whose quest for his brother had exposed the Benders' crimes, refused to let the trail go cold. He gathered every scrap of information, every rumor, every whisper. Each clue seemed to point in a new direction, and yet all dissolved into dust before proof could form. In the weeks following the discovery, sightings poured in from across the territories. Some claimed to have seen the family crossing into Indian territory, traveling under false names. Others insisted they had been captured by vigilantes and executed in secret. A few believed they had perished on the plains, their bones scattered and nameless beneath the same earth that had hidden their victims. None of it was ever confirmed. The frontier's vastness worked against justice. The prairies stretched endlessly westward, dotted with small towns that owed loyalty only to their own survival. Strangers came and went with the seasons, and the line between law and lawlessness blurred in the open space. In such a world, 4 people could vanish as easily as smoke in the wind, yet the legend of the Benders refused to fade. Each town seemed to invent its own ending. In one version, the family was hanged by a mob who buried them in unmarked graves. In another, Kate escaped alone, leaving her family behind, wandering from town to town as a healer who could cure the sick and speak to the dead. Some swore she had been seen in Denver, her hair shorter now, her name changed. Her seances attracting the same kind of desperate souls who had once visited Cherry Vale. Others placed her in San Francisco, dressed in mourning black, speaking softly to merchants and widows about fate, fortune, and forgiveness. Whether these stories were truth or imagination, they carried power. People needed to believe she was still out there, or that she wasn't. Either way, the fear gave her life beyond her escape. The diaries and papers recovered from the Bender house continued to haunt the investigation. Lawmen, journalists, even physicians studied them, trying to understand what kind of mind could orchestrate such evil. The more they read, the less sense it made. Kate's words revealed a mind consumed by a twisted faith. She saw death not as an ending, but as a form of purification. She wrote about energy released in the moment between breaths, claiming to witness flashes of light as her victims passed. Some entries sounded almost scientific, observations on timing, reaction, and anatomy. Others dissolved into ecstatic prose, describing visions of radiant figures emerging from dying bodies, beckoning her towards something greater. In one passage, she described her father and brother as the hands that strike, and her mother as the guardian of silence. She referred to herself as the voice between worlds. Each member of the family had their role, but it was Kate's hand that guided them. Her faith justified their acts. Her calm made them possible. For investigators, that calm was more terrifying than any madness. She was not driven by rage, nor the desperation of hunger. She killed because she believed it was divine work, and because she could. Her writings forced the frontier to confront an idea it had never known before: that evil could wear the face of reason, education, and grace. The shock rippled through the American heartland. In towns across Kansas and Missouri, suspicion replaced hospitality. Travelers found fewer doors open, fewer warm meals waiting along the trail. Inns and way stations, once symbols of refuge, were now places of caution and distrust. The Bender case broke something sacred on the frontier, the bond between stranger and host. Law enforcement, too, began to change. The discovery exposed how easily criminals could move between counties, exploiting the isolation of the plains. Letters and telegrams began to flow more frequently between sheriffs, marshals, and judges. Missing persons were no longer dismissed so easily as victims of misadventure. The Benders had shown that systematic evil could thrive in silence. The public's hunger for the story grew insatiable. Each retelling made Kate's legend larger, more grotesque, more supernatural. Some called her a vampire who drank blood in her seances. Others claimed she possessed the evil eye. A few insisted she was immortal, doomed to wander forever, unable to die for the sins she had committed. The truth was darker than any myth. She was human. And that was what terrified people most.